The slam of the door in my face echoed along the eerily quiet Gold Coast street. Brielle Carver, my eldest daughter, had just shoved me outside without hesitation, without a shred of mercy. I kept going to the second house in Lincoln Park where Kendrick Carver, my middle son, was living. The door opened only a crack, just wide enough for him to stick out a crumpled $50 bill. Then he pushed me away, muttering something about his professional reputation, as if my presence were a stain that could ruin his entire life. 2 children, 2 doors shut, 2 cold knives driven straight into the heart of a mother who had given everything to them. But when I knocked on the 3rd door, the humblest one, and also the one farthest from the wealthy neighborhoods, everything began to change. Micah Carver opened it. My youngest son, a teacher with a meager salary, the one the whole family had always looked down on, as if choosing to live decently were a failure. And standing beside Micah was Asha Reynolds, the daughter-in-law everyone hated, simply because she had no money and didn't carry a respectable enough family name to earn anyone's admiration. They didn't hesitate for even a second. They welcomed me inside, as if it were the only right thing to do in this world. That night, I sat on their worn sofa and accidentally overheard whispers from the kitchen. Micah and Asha were talking about selling their wedding rings to buy food for me. They didn't know I could hear them, and they certainly didn't know who I really was. Then the next morning, Roland Vance, my lawyer, showed up with a security team in front of that tiny house. When the truth was laid bare before everyone's eyes, Brielle and Kendrick's faces held no contempt anymore. What was left was pure horror, because in a single moment, they understood they had just lost everything. But to get to that part, I need to take you back to the beginning, back to the night I decided to carry out this test. Back to the moment I realized, bitterly, that I had used money to raise monsters. It all started 3 weeks earlier, in my office on the 23rd floor of a high-rise in the heart of the Loop. My name is Yvonne Carver. For 35 years, I built a textile empire, supplying major clothing retail chains across the continent. 12 years ago, when my husband died, everyone thought the company would collapse. Partners bet on my failure. Competitors sharpened their knives, ready to carve up the remains, but I did not fall. I worked 18 hours a day. I learned every aspect of the business my husband used to manage. I negotiated with banks, with international suppliers, with demanding clients who had no respect for women in this industry. I swallowed enough humiliation to break anyone, and I didn't just keep the company alive. I multiplied it 5-fold. Do you know who I did all of that for? For my 3 children. So they could have the life I never had. So they would never have to taste the bite of hunger the way I did as a child. So they would have opportunities, education, doors opening everywhere. Brielle studied in Switzerland. I paid for an MBA program that cost more than $120,000. Kendrick went to medical school at an elite private university. I invested $200,000 in his education. Only Micah, my youngest, chose a public college. Micah wanted to become a teacher. And for years, his 2 siblings mocked that decision as if Micah had personally signed his own failure. I gave them everything: houses, cars, trips, social connections. Every time they called, I opened my checkbook. Every time they had a problem, I solved it with money. I turned myself into a walking ATM for my own children. But that night, on a January evening, I sat alone in my empty office, staring at the financial statements showing how much allowance I'd given them over the years. And something inside me shattered. I had just received 3 calls, all 3 on the same day. Brielle wanted $100,000 to remodel her kitchen. Kendrick needed $70,000 to invest in a deal with a friend. And my Micah only called to ask if I was okay, just to ask that. That difference hit me like a hammer to the head. 2 children remembered me only when they needed money. One remembered me simply because he cared. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would run a test, a final test. I would disappear. I would pretend to be bankrupt, living on the streets like someone with nothing left. Then I would knock on each of their doors and ask for a place to stay for one night. I wanted to see who would open the door, who would feel ashamed, who would remember I was their mother before I was their source of money. I asked Roland Vance, my trusted lawyer, to keep it secret. He tried to stop me. He said it was too harsh, too risky for a 61-year-old woman, but my mind was made up. I needed to know the truth. I needed to see their real hearts without the disguise money allowed them to wear. "Are you sure?" Roland asked, his voice full of worry as we sat in my office late at night. "Once you do this, there won't be any going back. I'm sure," I said. "Roland, I need to know. If tomorrow I truly lose everything, who will take me in? Who will love me when I have nothing left to give?" He was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. "All right, but I'll have someone watching from a distance. A car will be waiting 2 blocks away, and you must carry this backup phone." He handed me an old phone. "Anytime you call, I'll be there immediately." I took the phone, feeling its weight heavier than any business contract I had ever signed. I locked all my jewelry in the safe. I wore old clothes bought from a thrift store, a worn gray coat that smelled of mothballs, pants stained all over, shoes with peeling soles. I smeared dirt on my hands. I didn't wash my hair for 3 days. I tied my belongings in a torn plastic bag. I looked in the mirror, and I didn't recognize the woman staring back. I looked like a homeless person. I looked invisible. I looked exactly like what this test required. The plan was brutally simple. I would walk to their homes. I would knock. I would say I had lost everything, that I needed somewhere to sleep. That was all, nothing more. And I would watch. Watch the reactions, the words, the gestures. The truth always rises to the surface when people don't have time to rehearse their lies. On the first night, I left my penthouse behind, leaving warmth, silk sheets, and a panoramic view of the glowing city. I rode down 23 floors and stepped outside. Chicago's February cold slapped me in the face. There was no turning back. I walked for hours, my feet blistered inside the torn shoes. The plastic bag ripped open, and I had to clutch my belongings in my arms like someone who didn't even have the right to carry anything properly. People avoided me on the sidewalk. Some looked at me with pity. Others looked at me with contempt. But most ignored me, as if I were an old piece of trash on the street, not worth existing in their sight. That night, I slept at Chicago Union Station. The smell of urine and despair clung to my clothes. An older woman shared a hard piece of bread with me. She said she had lived on the streets for 5 years, and her children had forgotten her. As she spoke, I heard myself think something ice cold. Could that be me in a few years? If I didn't do something right now? The second night was worse. I found a bench in Lincoln Park, but the wind off Lake Michigan pierced my thin coat like needles. I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me flinch. Drunk people shouting, police sirens, a dog barking somewhere far away. I lay there trembling, thinking about my silk bed at home, about a hot dinner, about safety. But at the same time, I thought about the 3 phone calls, about children who saw me as a walking checkbook. On the third night, I met an old man sitting under an overpass. He shared a thin blanket with me. "My kids don't want to know me anymore," he said in a raspy voice. "I'm not successful enough for them, not rich enough." So they forgot me. I looked at his wrinkled face under the yellow streetlight, and I saw my own future. A woman with $58 million in her bank account, yet capable of being as lonely as him. If I had no real love left, by the third day, I was ready. Filthy. Hungry. Bone cold, but ready. I knew exactly what I would do. I would go to Brielle's house first, then Kendrick's, and finally the small home of Micah and Asha. I didn't know what I would find, but I was about to discover it. Brielle's mansion glittered like a boastful jewel in the richest neighborhood of Chicago. A gold gate, trees trimmed down to the millimeter, a stone fountain by the entrance. I recognized every detail. because I had paid the down payment for that house. $200,000, money I pulled from my personal savings when my daughter got married 7 years ago. I stood in front of the electronic gate. My legs trembled, not only from 3 days on the streets, but from what I was about to do. I pressed the doorbell. I heard a buzz, then silence. I pressed it again. Brielle's voice came through the speaker, dry and cold. She didn't even ask who it was. She just said in a bored tone that she hadn't ordered anything at the door. "Sweetheart, it's me." "Your mother," I said. There was a long pause, so long I could hear my own heartbeat in my chest. Then the gate opened only a few inches. I pushed it and walked up the stone path I had helped design. Every step was a painful irony. The front door opened before I could reach it. Brielle appeared in the doorway, but she didn't step outside. She stood blocking the entrance as if I were some annoying door-to-door solicitor. She was wearing a coral pink athletic set that probably cost more than many people's monthly salary. Her hair was done perfectly. Her nails were freshly painted. Everything about her screamed money, comfort, and shallowness. She looked me up and down with an expression I will never forget. Not worry, disgust. "Mom," she finally said, dragging out the word as if it burned her tongue. "What are you doing here?" She didn't ask like a daughter asking her mother. She spoke like a homeowner addressing a stranger. I told her the story I had prepared. I had lost everything. The company went bankrupt. Creditors took the house. I'd been wandering for 3 days. I just needed a place to sleep for one night while I figured out what to do. My own daughter listened, and her face didn't change at all. When I finished, the first thing she did was glance over my shoulder toward the neighboring houses. She was more worried about someone seeing me standing in her driveway than about her mother standing there, filthy, shaking, and desperate. That gesture pierced straight through me like a rusted knife. "Mom, now isn't a good time," she said in a low voice. "Robert has an important dinner with partners tonight. I can't deal with situations like this right now." Situations? She called me a situation, as if I were a leaking roof or a burst pipe. I begged her, and I hate admitting that, but I needed to see how far Brielle's coldness would go. I said it was just one night. I could sleep anywhere. The maid's room, the garage, any corner. I just needed a roof. Brielle shook her head. Her diamond earrings glittered with the movement, the same earrings I had given her for her birthday last year. $5,000 worth of gemstones on a daughter's ears, and no place for her mother in a 6-bedroom house. "You can't stay here," she said firmly. "This will affect our reputation at the club." Neighbors love to talk. You know that. Besides, if you're truly in financial trouble, the last thing you need is to be around people who will judge you. This is for your own good. For my own good. She wrapped her refusal in fake concern, as if she were doing me a favor. I tried to step forward. Brielle stepped back and closed the door until only a narrow crack remained. "There are shelters," she said. "Charities. I'm sure you'll find something. And when you've sorted things out, when everything is better, we can talk, but right now I can't help you. I'm sorry." She wasn't sorry at all. That was the most horrifying part. There wasn't a single speck of real pain in Brielle's voice. She just wanted to end this uncomfortable conversation as quickly as possible so she could return to her perfect world of appearances and shallowness. "Brielle," I said her full name, my voice breaking. "Honey, I'm your mother. I changed your diapers. I taught you how to walk. I paid for your education, your wedding, this house. Everything you have came from me." Her face hardened, and in that moment, I saw something that made my blood turn colder than any night on the street. I saw resentment, as if everything I'd ever done for her was a debt weighing on her shoulders. As if a mother's love were a burden she'd been waiting a long time to shake off. "Exactly, Mom," Brielle said, venom in every word. "You gave everything. You always gave, always controlled, always decided. Now that you have nothing, You expect me to give it all back like it was an investment. That's not how it works. I have my own life, my own responsibilities. I can't carry your financial mistakes. And then the door slammed shut. I heard the bolt slide, metal clicking into place, a cold sound, like the coffin lid of my relationship with my child closing forever. I stood there staring at the solid mahogany door I had helped pay for. Through the side window, I saw Brielle return to the living room, pick up her phone, dial, and start talking to someone while laughing. I walked away from that house carrying a feeling worse than sadness. I felt empty, as if a part of me had been left behind on the other side of the door that had just closed. The daughter I had raised, the little girl who used to cling to me after nightmares, the young woman who once cried on my shoulder when her first love left her, no longer existed. That girl had been replaced by a cold woman who valued her neighbor's eyes more than her own mother's safety. If you're wondering whether Kendrick in Lincoln Park treated me differently from Brielle, or whether he also saw me as a stain to be tossed away as quickly as possible, then don't look away. Because the second door didn't just close, it left something in my hand, something that made me understand just how wrong I had been in the way I raised my children. In the next part, I'll tell you what Kendrick did inside that cold glass house and why that crumpled $50 bill became the second knife. I walked nearly 2 miles to Lincoln Park, where Kendrick Carver lived. Inside my torn shoes, my feet burned. It felt as though blood had already soaked through my thin socks. Hunger made my head spin. If I turned my head even a little too fast, black spots danced before my eyes, as if they wanted to pull me down right there on the sidewalk. But I kept walking. I had to finish this test. I needed to know whether all my children were the same, or whether there was still a trace of humanity left in any of them, even if only a small part. Kendrick's house was nothing like Brielle Carver's. If Brielle's mansion glittered with showy excess, Kendrick's place was modern in a cold way. Glass and steel, minimalist, rigid, just like him. I rang the bell and waited. This time there was no delay. Kendrick opened the door almost immediately, as if he were expecting a delivered package. When he saw me, the look on his face was a genuine shock. "Mom," he blurted out. For exactly 1 second, I thought, maybe he would be different. "What happened to you?" His eyes swept quickly over my filthy clothes, my greasy hair, the torn bag I clutched to my chest. He stepped toward me and I thought he was going to hug me, but Kendrick didn't hug me. He immediately glanced left and right along the street. Just like Brielle, the same concern about appearances, the same fear that someone might see them standing next to me. "Get inside, quickly," he said, and shoved me in. The door snapped shut behind me at once, decisive and hurried, as if he were hiding a piece of evidence of a crime. I stood in the entryway. Kendrick didn't invite me farther in. He kept his distance, as if my poverty could infect him through the air. "What happened?" he repeated. "Where have you been? Why didn't you call?" I told him the story I had prepared. Bankruptcy, loss, being pushed onto the streets, nights outside, and now I just needed a temporary place to stay. Kendrick listened with his arms crossed over his chest. I could see his mind working. Not working out how to help me, but working out how to get rid of me. The fastest way, the neatest way, the least troublesome way. When I finished, he sighed. A long, weary sigh, as if I were a difficult patient in his clinic, not his own mother. "Mom," Kendrick began, his voice shifting into that rational tone I had heard so many times when he spoke to others. "I have a reputation to maintain. I'm a cardiovascular surgeon. My patients are important people, politicians, business owners. If anyone finds out my mother is living on the streets, it will affect my practice. You understand, right?" "No," I said, blunt to the point of cruelty. "My son, I don't understand." Kendrick opened his wallet. Italian leather. I recognized it immediately because it was the gift I gave him for his birthday 2 years ago. $800. He pulled out a few bills and held them out to me. $50 total. He held it out without stepping closer, as if he were afraid of accidentally touching me. "Take this," he said. "Go to a cheap hotel, rest, shower. When you look more presentable, we can talk about how to deal with the situation. But you can't stay here. I have surgery tomorrow morning. I need to focus. I can't have this distraction." A distraction. His homeless mother was a distraction. I didn't take the money. I just looked straight into Kendrick's eyes, trying to find even just a trace of the boy he used to be. The boy who used to sprint into my arms when I came home late. The boy who used to whisper that when he grew up, he would buy me a huge house so I'd never have to work so hard again. But that boy had died at some point, and I didn't know when. And the most frightening thing was that I hadn't even noticed the day he was buried. "Kendrick," I said, my voice breaking from the cold and from the pain. "I spent entire nights studying with you for your medical exams. I brought you coffee at 3 a.m. when you stayed up to review. When you couldn't afford the $500 textbooks, I sold my jewelry to buy them for you. And now, you hand me $50 and call me a distraction." Kendrick clenched his jaw. The bills still hung between us like a physical barrier, replacing a hug, replacing family. "Mom, this isn't personal," he said, his voice clinical, the same voice he used to deliver bad news to a patient's family. "It's just that right now, I'm not in a position to help you in the way you need. I have my own family to provide for, my own expenses. I can't simply take on one more person." One more person. That's what I was to him. One more person. Not his mother. Not the woman who sacrificed her own dreams to fund his. Just someone else making his life inconvenient. I took the $50, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to see whether that small act would make Kendrick's heart stir even a little. Nothing. His face stayed neutral, professional, distant, as if he had just completed an unpleasant but necessary transaction. "Now you need to go," Kendrick said, pointing toward the door. "Seriously, Mom, I have to get up early. I can't deal with this right now. When you're settled, call me and we'll see what we can do. But you have to understand, I have limits, too." He put a hand on my shoulder, not a touch of affection, but a firm touch to direct me. He was guiding me toward the exit. He was pushing me out of his life, step by step. At the door, he opened it and motioned for me to leave. The cold night air hit my face again like a slap. "Be careful," Kendrick said. Then he added, in a tone like he was teaching a lesson, "And honestly, you should have been more careful with your investments. At your age, you should have had everything secured. This shouldn't have happened." So he didn't just refuse me. He blamed me. The son I spent $200,000 training into a doctor stood there, lecturing me about financial management, while he shoved me out of his home with his own hands. The door closed. This time, I didn't hear a bolt slide, because Kendrick disappeared back into the house before I even made it all the way down the steps. He didn't even pause to make sure I left safely. He just shut the door and walked away. I stood under the yellowish light in his yard. The crumpled $50 sat in my hand. I stared at it the way you stare at poison. This was the value of the relationship between me and my son. $50, less than what he probably spent on any random dinner. I stuffed the money into my pocket. I would use it later, not for myself, but to remind myself that this happened, that it was real, that on the same day, my 2 oldest children shut their doors in my face without blinking. 2 doors closed, 2 children lost. I had only one left, Micah Carver, my youngest, the one who chose to become a teacher when everyone said it was a waste of talent, the one who married Asha Reynolds, a girl from a modest family, working as an office cleaner when they met, the one the entire family looked at with both pity and contempt. And here is what I have to confess, something that shames me. I had looked down on them too. I never said it out loud, but I had in my heart. When Micah brought Asha to meet me, I expected more. I expected a girl from a good family. I expected useful connections. I expected someone who would elevate Micah's status, not someone who might keep my son in mediocrity financially. At family gatherings, Brielle and Kendrick often threw out comments like, "Knives. It's such a shame Micah settles for so little." Or, "Just imagine if he met someone with ambition." And me, what did I do? I didn't defend them. I stayed silent. I let those poisonous words hang in the air without protesting. Asha always saw it. I know she did. I saw her smile shrink every time Brielle bragged about her trips to Europe, or when Kendrick mentioned his millionaire patients. I saw Micah squeeze Asha's hand under the table, a small, quiet squeeze, as if to tell her, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." And I looked away. Before I tell you what happened at that small house in South Shore, you need to understand one thing. Back then, I wasn't just afraid of being rejected a third time. I was afraid of something worse. I was afraid that if Micah also shut his door, then this test would no longer be a test. It would become a verdict on my entire life as a mother. A verdict on 35 years of working like a machine, trading my youth and strength for my children's future, only to be repaid by 3 doors slamming shut. And in my pocket, Kendrick's $50 bill felt like a cut. It rubbed against my skin, reminding me that to my 2 oldest children, I was no longer a mother, but only a problem to be handled. That was why every step toward South Shore then felt as heavy as dragging an entire lifetime of guilt. Micah and Asha's home was a modest 1-story building. The cream-colored paint had peeled in places. A small garden with flowers Asha had clearly tended with her own hands. A wooden fence that needed repairs. Everything was simple, humble, but it felt real, like a home rather than an asset. There was no electronic gate, no intercom. Just a wooden door and a simple doorbell button. I pressed it. The chime rang. I heard footsteps inside, and then the door opened. Asha Reynolds stood in front of me. She wore an olive sweater, something that looked like it could be hand-knit, warm and honest. Her hair was tied neatly back. No makeup, no elaborate jewelry, only her wedding ring. A thin silver band, probably costing less than $100 when they bought it. Asha's eyes widened when she saw me. "Yvonne!" she cried, exactly the way she had always addressed me. Asha had never called me mother-in-law or Mrs. Carver, just Yvonne. Before, that used to irritate me. I used to think it was disrespectful. But in that moment, I suddenly understood. It was her way of trying to bring me closer, as equals, not according to the cold hierarchy of the rich. "Oh my God, what happened to you?" Asha asked, and she didn't wait for an answer. She immediately took my arm and pulled me inside. Warmth wrapped around me the moment I stepped over the threshold. Not the warmth of expensive heating, but a warmth with a smell of home-cooked food, freshly toasted bread, the smell of a real house. "Micah!" Asha called loudly into the house. "Hurry, it's your mom!" Micah Carver appeared from the direction of the kitchen. He wore a simple gray shirt and old jeans. When he saw me, his face ran through a rainbow of emotions. Surprise, worry, pain, and something I had not seen on Brielle or Kendrick. Real love. "Mom," Micah said, then rushed toward me. "What happened?" "Are you okay? Did someone hurt you? Where have you been?" His hands touched my face, my shoulders, as if checking for injuries. He didn't care that I was dirty. He didn't care that I smelled. He only cared whether I was all right. Asha disappeared deeper into the house. I heard her moving quickly, opening drawers, turning on hot water, doing everything on instinct, the instinct of someone who sees a loved one hurt. Micah led me to the sofa, an old brown fabric piece with a stitched patch on the armrest. I sat down and I felt my legs finally surrender after days of dragging myself along. I told the story again, bankruptcy, losing everything, nights on the street. Micah listened, his eyes reddening, tears spilling over. He didn't mention reputation. He didn't bring up the neighbors. He didn't ask why I had let things get this far. He simply listened, with an open heart that was breaking. When I finished, the room fell into a heavy silence for a few seconds. Then Micah spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it was so firm I couldn't argue. "You'll stay here," he said. "No debate, Mom. This is your home now." Asha came back with clean towels and clothes. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that makes you feel welcomed, not pitied. "I've heated water so you can shower," Asha said. "We don't have a bathtub, only a shower, but the water's hot. After that, you'll eat something. You look so thin." "But you don't have space," I protested weakly, even as something inside me flared into an emotion I couldn't name. "You only have one bedroom." "We'll sleep in the living room," Micah answered without hesitation. "You take the bed. No arguments." "No," I tried again. "You need privacy. I can sleep on the sofa." Asha knelt in front of me. Her brown eyes looked at me with a warmth I knew I didn't deserve. "Yvonne," she said gently, "you're Micah's mother. You're family. Family doesn't sleep on the sofa when there's a bed in the house. Please let us do this for you." The words, "please let us do this for you," made me feel as if I were being torn apart piece by piece. Brielle and Kendrick gave me money, along with excuses. But these two people who had almost nothing were giving me everything they had, without conditions, without blame. I showered in their tiny bathroom, tiles chipped at a few corners, a shower curtain with a patched spot, and a shower head that rattled like an old man trying his best to do his job well. Hot water poured over my filthy skin, washing away dust, the smell of the streets, and that feeling of humiliation that had clung to me for days. I stood under that stream, and at last, I allowed myself to cry. I didn't cry because of the nights I'd spent outside. I cried for the years I had wasted, simply because I had valued everything wrong. I cried because my two oldest children, the ones I had handed castles to, had shut their doors on me without hesitation. And I cried because my youngest son, living in this modest house, had opened his door to me as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Hot water mixed with tears and slid down my face. I looked down at my hands that had signed checks worth millions of dollars, now trembling under the shower in a poor teacher's bathroom, hands that had built an empire, yet didn't know how to build love. I thought of the diamond ring on Brielle Carver's finger, so large it was blinding. I thought of the Rolex on Kendrick Carver's wrist. Then I remembered Asha Reynolds' thin silver ring, probably worth no more than an expensive dinner, yet she was willing to sell it to save me. True value isn't measured in carats or brands. True value is measured by how much you're willing to give, when you, yourself, have nothing. When I stepped out of the bathroom, Asha had set clean clothes on the bed. Her clothes, a soft gray pair of sweatpants and a light brown sweatshirt. They were a little loose on me because Asha was taller, but they were clean, smelled of cheap fabric softener, and strangely, they smelled even more like genuine care. I put them on, feeling the soft fabric against skin that had just been washed clean. For 3 days, I had worn my pretend poor outfit, dirty, foul, cold, and full of fear, and now I was wearing the clothes of the daughter-in-law I had once looked down on. And they were warmer than any designer outfit I had ever owned. At the small dining table, fitted perfectly into the tight space between the living room and the kitchen, a plate of food was waiting. Homemade vegetable soup. Toast. A glass of orange juice. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, but everything had been prepared with love, and it was set in front of me with dignity, as if I deserved care, not charity. Micah and Asha sat with me. They didn't look at me with pity while I ate. They talked about ordinary things, small things, yet warm. Micah talked about his students. "Jaden," Micah said, his eyes suddenly lighting up. "The boy with dyslexia I told you about. Today he read an entire paragraph without help. You should have seen his face, like he'd just climbed Mount Everest." Asha talked about the small garden in front of the house. She said the flowers were starting to sprout even though the weather was still cold. The daffodils are about to bloom, she smiled. I always think they're brave, pushing through snow to find the sun. They treated me like a human being. Not like a tragedy. There was a very small moment during that dinner, so small that if you weren't paying attention, you would miss it. I dropped my spoon. It was just a soft clink against the table, but it made me jerk, my heart pounding as if I'd heard another door bolt slam shut. I had grown used to things breaking. Used to being pushed out. Used to the feeling that I was not allowed to exist in someone else's space. But Micah simply reached out, picked up the spoon, placed it back into my hand, and said very softly, "It's okay, Mom." Just 3 words. And yet I nearly cried right there at the table. Because over the past 3 days, I had heard more than enough excuses, more than enough reasons, more than enough "you should," but this was the first time someone had told me, you don't need to apologize for existing. And in that moment, I suddenly understood. Tonight had only just begun, but my heart was already traveling from ice back to fire. After dinner, Asha cleaned up in the kitchen. I sat in the living room pretending to focus on their old television, but in truth, every nerve in my body was stretched tight, listening. I heard Micah speak to Asha in a low voice, pulling her into the kitchen. He thought I couldn't hear. But the thin walls of this house couldn't keep secrets. "We don't have enough money to support 3 people, Micah whispered. "My paycheck only covers 2. "I know," Asha replied. Her voice was calm, not panicked. "I've already thought about it." A pause. Then I heard a drawer open, a sound so distinct like a blade slicing into piece. "We can sell the rings," Asha said. "We don't really need them. They're just symbols. Our marriage isn't dependent on 2 pieces of metal." My heart stopped. They were talking about selling their wedding rings, the one symbol they nearly had of their commitment, because of me. "No," Micah said. But his voice didn't convince me. It sounded torn apart. "Those rings mean something to you. They mean something because we love each other," Asha said. "And we'll keep loving each other, with them or without them. Your mom needs us right now. That matters more than any symbol. Tomorrow morning I'll go to the pawn shop. Maybe they'll give about $300. With that, we can buy food for a month, and then we'll see." $300. That was the value of their rings at a pawn shop, and she was willing to give them up without thinking twice. Meanwhile, Brielle had $5,000 earrings hanging from her ears and wouldn't let me cross her threshold. Kendrick carried an $800 wallet and handed me $50 as if it were a generous gift. "I love you," I heard Micah say, his voice breaking. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." "There's nothing to deserve," Asha answered, gentle enough to make me ache. "It's not about deserving. It's about choosing to do the right thing. Your mom raised you. She educated you. Now it's our turn to take care of her. That's how real family works." I squeezed my eyes shut. Tears spilled over, impossible to control. The woman I had once looked at with contempt was the only one who truly understood what the word family meant. Asha, the woman who cleaned office buildings to make extra money because Micah's teacher's salary wasn't enough. Asha, the woman I once thought was not enough for my son. She was the most enough. They came back into the living room. I quickly wiped my tears and pretended to be absorbed in the news on TV. Asha brought me a mustard-colored hand-knit blanket. "This belonged to my grandmother," she said as she draped it over my legs. "It always kept me warm. I hope it will do the same for you." That night, despite my protests, they guided me into the bedroom. The room was small, just enough for a double bed, an old wardrobe, and a dresser with peeling paint. The white cotton sheets were simple, washed so many times they felt soft as silk. On the bedside table was a wedding photo of them, Micah in a suit that was clearly borrowed, Asha in a simple white dress, probably bought at some discount store. But their smiles were so pure it hurt to look at. "Please rest," Micah said, then kissed my forehead. just like he used to when he was little. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to do. But tonight, sleep in peace. You're safe here. They left, closing the door behind them. I stayed alone in a room that smelled of cheap lavender and hope. I lay down on that bed, the only luxury this couple owned, and they had handed it to me without hesitation. I still couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brielle's face as she shut the door in mine. I saw Kendrick holding out $50 as if I were a stranger begging. And then I saw Asha kneeling in front of me, calling me family with eyes full of genuine compassion. I thought about my children's childhoods, Brielle as a little girl, clinging to me during a storm. "Mom, I'm scared of thunder." I held her and promised I would always protect her. When did that love turn into cold calculation? Kendrick, at 7 years old, crying because he was being bullied. "Why do they hate me, Mom?" I wiped his tears and told him he had to be strong. But what kind of strength did I teach him? The kind that could refuse his own mother when she needed help? And Micah, my Micah, at 5 years old, coming home from kindergarten with only half of his lunch left. "Mom, I gave my friend half my sandwich. He forgot his food." "You have to keep your food for yourself," I said. "But Mom," Micah answered, his big eyes serious, he was hungry. Even then, Micah understood what Brielle and Kendrick had never learned, that real wealth is the ability to give, not the ability to accumulate. I raised 3 children in the same house, gave them the same values, the same opportunities. So why did only one remember how to be human? Around midnight, I heard movement in the living room. I quietly got up and cracked the door open just a few inches. I saw Micah and Asha arranging themselves to sleep on the small sofa. They didn't fit. Micah was almost hanging off one end. Asha lay at an angle, her head propped awkwardly to support her back. But their hands were still intertwined, as if no matter how uncomfortable it was, they still chose to be together. "Sorry," Micah whispered. "I know this isn't comfortable." "I'm okay," Asha replied. "Just thinking your mom is sleeping warm and safe makes every discomfort worth it." A brief silence, then Micah continued, his voice heavy. "I'm sorry I can't give you more. I'm sorry you have to live like this. You deserve a bigger house, nicer things, an easier life." Asha's answer destroyed me. "Micah," she said very softly, but each word landed straight in the heart. "I have exactly what I want. I have you. We have health. We have jobs. We have a roof. And now we can help someone who needs us. That isn't little. That's everything. That's everything." Those 3 words held more wisdom than all the degrees I had ever paid for. A woman in simple clothes and a modest home understood what my millionaire daughter and my doctor's son had forgotten or never learned. That real wealth is not measured in dollars. It is measured by the ability to give when you have nothing. I went back to the bed, and this time I cried. I cried hard, muffling the sound into the pillow so they wouldn't hear. I cried for the years I spent building an empire for children who worshiped money. I cried because I had misjudged Asha so deeply. I cried because I almost missed the chance to see my youngest son's true heart. But I also cried from relief, because in the middle of this painful test, I had found something I thought I'd lost forever, proof that real love still exists. That kindness still remains, that not all my children had turned into selfish monsters. Tomorrow, Roland Vance would come. Tomorrow the truth would be revealed. Tomorrow I would have to face the consequences of what I had just discovered. But tonight, lying in the bed of the couple who had given me everything without asking for anything, I knew one thing for certain. No matter where things went with Brielle and Kendrick, no matter whether those relationships could be saved or not, Micah and Asha would always have a place in my life. They saved me. Not from the streets, because I was never truly there. They saved me from becoming a woman so bitter she no longer believed in humanity. And when sleep finally came, I thought, That was worth more than the $58 million in my bank account. I woke up to the smell of cheap coffee and toasted bread drifting through the small house. When I stepped out of the room, I saw Asha Reynolds standing in the kitchen. She was still wearing the same sweater as yesterday, her hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, so simple and straightforward that it made it hard for me to look away. "Good morning," Asha smiled softly. "Did you sleep well, Yvonne?" "There's coffee if you'd like." She poured me a cup of coffee, the cheapest kind, but in that moment it tasted like glory. Not because it was good coffee, but because I received it with kindness, not pity or avoidance. We sat at the small table by the kitchen. Micah Carver had left for work early, as he did every day. Asha took a sip and looked at me over the rim of her cup, her gaze calm but sharp. "Yvonne, can I ask you something?" she said. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but something isn't right. Someone like you, how did you lose everything so fast? And why did you walk to our place instead of finding another way?" I stiffened. She wasn't accusing, just like someone who had nearly put all the pieces together. I was scrambling for words when Micah walked in from the living room, rubbing his neck and back from sleeping on the sofa. "Morning," he mumbled sleepily. "What time is it?" "Almost 7, Asha replied, but her eyes still didn't leave me. "We're talking." Micah took one glance and sensed the strange tension. "What's going on?" Asha softened as if she didn't want to panic him. "Nothing, just talking." But I knew Asha was almost certain. The woman my family had always underestimated had seen the truth faster than all of them. I set my coffee down and drew a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you both." The words caught in my throat. Micah put his hand on my shoulder, warm and steady. "Whatever it is, Mom," he said, "we're here." Asha spoke right after him, her voice gentle but clear. "Before you say it, I want you to know one thing. It doesn't matter what secret you're keeping. It doesn't matter whether this is a test or not. We would still open the door. Still give up the bed. And if this happened again, we would do exactly the same." I looked at her, almost unable to breathe. "You already know," I said quietly. "I only suspect," Asha corrected. "The way you talk, the way you hold yourself, small details that don't match." But I decided it doesn't matter, because even if it's a test, the right answer is still take you in, care for you, treat you as family. Micah turned to me, stunned. "Is that true, Mom?" My tears fell before I could stop them. "Yes," I whispered. "My son, I'm sorry." I had prepared for anger, for yelling, for them to throw me out, but Micah only held me tight and let me cry into his chest. "Why, Mom?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why did you have to do that?" "Because I needed to know," I sobbed. "Who loves me because I'm their mother, and who only sees me as a source of money." Then I told them everything. Brielle Carver shut the door because she was afraid of the neighbors talking. Kendrick Carver handed me $50 and pushed me out like an inconvenience. Only Micah and Asha took me in. No conditions, no questions about benefit. Asha paused for a beat, then said slowly, "Then the test worked. You found the truth." "And we found something too." "What?" I asked. "That we will do what's right," Asha answered, "even when no one is watching." Micah continued, his voice low but gentle. "And I also see. If a mother has to test her children's love like that, it means she's been hurt very deeply." That line stabbed my chest. I looked at the clock. 8:15. In 45 minutes, Roland Vance would arrive, not only with the truth, but with its weight. Once it was exposed, it couldn't be taken back. I looked at Micah, at Asha, and understood. Everything until now had only been the prelude. "There's one more thing," I said. "At 9, my lawyer will come. He'll reveal who I really am, and There will be consequences for Brielle and Kendrick. What kind of consequences? Micah's face tightened. I'm going to rewrite my will, I said bluntly. They closed the door on me. I'm going to close the door on them. You two will inherit everything. Micah stepped back as if slapped. No! You can't do that. No matter what, they're still your children. My voice hardened. But they're children who refused their mother when she needed them most. Asha cut in, calm but firm. Yvonne, I understand your pain, but taking away the inheritance won't heal anything. It will only create more resentment and division. This isn't revenge, I shot back immediately, even though deep down I knew a part of it was. This is consequence. They need to understand choices have a price. Micah dropped onto the sofa, holding his head. Mom, I never wanted money. I became a teacher because I wanted something that mattered more than accumulation. I sat down beside him. I know, and that's why I believe you deserve it. Asha looked at us, like someone holding a thin thread stretched between two cliffs. Don't do anything permanent today, she said. Let Roland come. Let the truth be said. But don't rewrite the will right now. Give yourself time. And give Brielle and Kendrick time to face it and change. I let out a dry laugh. They won't change. You know them in the version you raised with money, Asha corrected, soft but sharp. But give them one chance to prove me wrong. Micah lifted his head, eyes red. If you want to teach them with your life, not with your death. You don't have to give them more money, but don't cut them out of your life today. I looked at the clock. 8:30, only half an hour left to decide justice or healing. In the end, I nodded. I'll call Roland, I said. Bring everything, except the will paperwork. This will be a confrontation, not an execution. Asha exhaled. That's a good start. I called Roland Vance. He answered quickly. Yvonne? Change of plan, I said. Bring everything except the will. We confront them. Understood, Roland replied. 20 minutes. The next 20 minutes were tight as a drawn wire. Asha made more coffee. Micah changed his clothes. And I stayed in Asha's borrowed outfit. I wanted Roland to see me like this. And I also wanted myself to remember what it felt like to stand on the other side. At exactly 9 o'clock, 2 black SUVs stopped in front of the house. Roland stepped out with his assistant. 4 security men followed, suits crisp and proper. The small house suddenly felt invaded by power and money. Neighbors began to part their curtains and look out. I opened the door before they could knock. Roland froze for a beat, then blurted out, "Oh my God, Yvonne, you look awful." "Thank you," I replied dryly. "Let me introduce you to the only 2 people who cared about me, not because of who I am, but because of how I was." Micah and Asha stepped forward, timid in front of the convoy and the security. Roland dipped his head to them with genuine respect. "It's an honor to meet you both. Yvonne has said many good things about you." Asha gave a sad smile. "Probably not good things." "The opposite," Roland said at once. "All good." In the crowded living room, Roland set a folder on the table. There was no bankruptcy, no losses, he said. "Everything is running perfectly. It was all staged." Micah stared at the numbers, eyes widening. "Mom, is it true?" "Completely true," Roland confirmed. "Your mother is one of the richest women in the country, and she pretended to go bankrupt to test her children." Asha lifted a hand to her mouth, her voice wavering. "We were going to sell our rings." "Exactly," I said, "because you were ready to sell your rings, while your siblings wouldn't even let me step through the door." Roland flipped to another page. "I called Brielle Carver and Kendrick Carver early this morning. I told them there was new information and asked them to come here at 10 o'clock. Both confirmed they would." I looked at the clock. 9:40. In 20 minutes, Brielle and Kendrick would arrive. And this time, they wouldn't be facing a homeless woman they could avoid. They would be facing the truth. And they would be facing the consequences of their own choices. 5 minutes before 10 o'clock, Brielle arrived. Her white Mercedes gleamed in an almost offensive way on this modest street, where old cars were parked along the curb. She stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses and a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than Micah's monthly rent. 2 minutes later, Kendrick arrived. His gray BMW pulled in right behind Brielle's Mercedes. He got out, checked his expensive watch, clearly irritated at having to be here. They met on the sidewalk in front of Micah's house. Watching through the window, I saw them talking. Brielle gestured toward the house with open contempt. Kendrick shrugged. Neither of them looked even remotely happy to be here. They walked up to the door. I could hear their voices before they knocked. "Why is Mom's lawyer coming to Micah's house?" Brielle asked, disgust obvious in her tone. His house. "This is ridiculous." "No idea," Kendrick replied. "But let's make it quick. I have surgery at 1. They knocked. Micah looked at me with panic in his eyes. I nodded. He took a deep breath and opened the door. The expression on Brielle and Kendrick's faces when they saw Micah was barely concealed annoyance. "What are you doing here?" Brielle asked, as if Micah were the intruder in his own home. "I live here," Micah answered, his voice shaking. "This is my house." Brielle stepped inside without waiting to be invited. Kendrick followed her in. Their eyes swept over the small room with undisguised contempt. They saw Roland in an expensive suit. They saw the security men. They saw documents spread across the table. Then they saw me. Brielle froze. "Mom," she blurted, "what are you doing here?" She turned to Roland. "You told us you had information about Mom's situation. Not that she would be here." "Oh, she's definitely here," Roland said in a tone I had never heard from him. Cold, professional, devastating. Kendrick looked me up and down. I was still wearing Asha's borrowed clothes. My hair still hadn't been professionally done. I still looked poor. "Did you get money to come here?" he asked, with that same contemptful tone he probably used on poor patients. "I didn't need money," I said. "I was already here." "I've been here for 3 days since you shut the door in my face." Silence followed. Absolute. I watched their minds process it, the pieces beginning to click into place. "Wait," Brielle said slowly. "I didn't know that was really you." "You looked like a homeless person. I thought it was some kind of scam." "It was me," I said firmly. "Your own mother, dirty and desperate, and you didn't care." Kendrick finally found his voice. "This is a trap," he accused. "You set a trap for us. I gave you a test," I corrected. "A test you failed badly." Roland stepped in. "Let me clarify your mother's financial situation." He gathered the papers and laid them on the table. Linda Carver did not go bankrupt. She didn't lose anything. Her companies are operating at record profits. Her accounts were never touched. Her current net worth is approximately $58 million. The number hung in the air like a bomb. Brielle let herself collapse into a chair. Her face went paper white. Kendrick stared at the documents, not fully able to process what he was seeing. "This was all an act," Roland continued. "Your mother pretended to lose everything to test you so she could see how you would react, so she could see who would love her when she had no money left to give." Kendrick finally reacted. "So this is punishment." "You're punishing us for a mistake." "That wasn't a mistake," I said, my voice hard. "That was a revelation. A mistake is something you do unintentionally. You consciously chose to close the door on your mother. You chose your comfort over your mother's safety." "That was a decision, not a mistake." Brielle found her voice. She started crying. Not silent tears, but loud, dramatic sobs. "I'm sorry," she screamed. "I didn't know. I thought you were a stranger." "If I had known it was really you, that's exactly the problem," I cut in. "I had to be a stranger for you to treat me that way, but I was still your mother. And if I truly had been homeless, I still would have deserved more compassion than what you showed." Micah stood up from the sofa. His voice trembled as he spoke. You've treated me like a failure for years. Like choosing to be a teacher was something shameful for the family. Like Asha wasn't good enough because she doesn't have money or a famous name. You've looked at me with pity, with contempt. Brielle tried to interrupt, but Micah lifted his hand. No. It's my turn to speak. For years, I've listened to your hurtful comments. I've heard you mock my salary. I've heard you compare your houses, your cars, your lives to mine, like I had failed at something basic. Tears ran down Micah's face, but his voice grew stronger. And when Mom showed up at my door, dirty and terrified, I didn't hesitate. Because that's how she raised me. Love without conditions, help without asking, and you two had the same upbringing, the same parents, the same lessons, but you chose something else. Asha stood beside him. Her voice was calm but steady. You've hated me. I know you have, because I wasn't good enough for your brother, because I clean offices and I don't have a college degree. But when your mother needed help, when you refused her, we took her in. And we would do it again. Roland cleared his throat. Linda asked me to bring the documents to amend her will, to completely disinherit Brielle and Kendrick and leave everything to Micah and Asha. Brielle stopped crying instantly. Her eyes went wide with horror. You can't do that, she said. I can, I replied, and I intended to. Intended? Kendrick latched onto the past tense. Micah and Asha convinced me not to make that decision today, I explained. They told me forgiveness is a path, not an event, that I should give you a chance. I looked directly at Brielle, then Kendrick. This is what will happen. I'm not changing the will today, but I'm also not continuing to be your personal bank. The allowance ends. The financial rescues end. If you want my money when I die, you'll first have to build a real relationship with me. What does that mean? Kendrick asked. It means family therapy, Roland replied. It means real work on your relationship. It means proving over years, not days or weeks, that you have truly changed. And if you don't, the will be rewritten, and everything will go to Micah and Asha. Brielle and Kendrick looked at each other. I could see calculations forming in their minds. They were weighing whether the effort was worth the payoff, whether pretending to change for years would be an investment with enough return. And that shattered my heart all over again, because even now, even after everything, they were still thinking in transactional terms. But then something shifted in Brielle's eyes. She stepped closer to me, this time not to argue or beg. She knelt in front of the chair where I sat. Mom, she said in a broken voice, you're right about everything. I've become a horrible person, someone a mother never wanted her child to become, and I don't know if I can change. But I want to try, not because of the money, but because I saw my future when you closed that door. I saw myself becoming an old woman alone in an empty mansion, and it terrified me. It was the first real thing I'd heard her say in years. Kendrick stepped forward too. I want to try as well, he said. I don't know how to fix this. But I want to learn. I looked at them. The skepticism on my face was unmistakable. You don't trust us, Brielle said, and that's okay. We haven't earned trust. But please give us a chance to prove it. I looked to Micah. He was the one who had endured their contempt the most. What do you think? I asked. Micah took a deep breath. If they truly try, if they truly change, then yes. Give them a chance. But if this is just a performance, if they go back to the way they were once the shock wears off, then you have to follow through on your threat. Asha nodded in agreement. Everyone deserves a second chance, but a third has to be earned. It was decided. Those were the rules. There's one more thing I need to say, I began, even though my throat still felt tight. And this is the most important thing. The entire room fell silent. I turned to Micah and Asha. Come closer. They stood. I took their hands and squeezed them, like I needed to be sure I was exactly where I was supposed to be. You two reminded me of what I had forgotten, I said slowly. Real love, real sacrifice, the things money can't buy. I won't rewrite the will today, but I will do something right now. I looked at Roland Vance. The packet you prepared, give it to him. Roland smiled, opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick envelope and handed it to Micah. Open it, I said. Micah opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were legal documents and a check. He skimmed them, then snapped his head up, eyes wide. A property deed. Mom, what is this? It's the paperwork for a house, I replied. A real house, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a yard big enough for Asha to plant every flower she wants, in a safe neighborhood, close to the school where you teach. I bought it 2 days before I started this test. Micah seemed to choke on his words. We can't accept this. It's too much. I shook my head. This isn't a gift to repay you. It's recognition. It's my way of saying I finally see you, not your degree, not your income, but your character. Asha had been crying for who knows how long. She wiped her face quickly, her voice so small it was almost a breath. Yvonne, we didn't do this to receive anything. I know, I said, pulling her into a hug. And that's exactly why you deserve it even more. At that moment, Brielle sprang up, her chair scraping sharply. That's not fair, she almost shouted. We're your children, too. Why do they get a house while we get nothing? I turned to Brielle, calm to the point of cold. Because you already have a house, I said. Houses I helped pay for. You've taken from me for years. Money, opportunities, connections, whatever you needed. Micah didn't. He worked, stood on his own feet, and when I knocked, he opened the door. Kendrick cut in, his voice bitter. So this is punishment. You're punishing us for a mistake. I looked him straight in the eyes. Not a mistake, I said. A choice. You chose to close the door on your mother. You chose your convenience over your mother's safety. That wasn't accidental. That was a decision. I stood. My voice wasn't loud, but every word landed clearly. But listen to me. I'm not only blaming you two. I have to take responsibility too. For years, I gave too much. And in doing so, I taught you the wrong lessons. That money fixes everything, that appearances matter more than substance, that success is measured in property. I paused. You two are my product, and I'm correcting what I did wrong. Micah refused that path. And now, all of us have to live with the consequences, but we also have to have the chance to change. Roland moved into the practical side. He drafted an official document laying out the conditions under which Brielle and Kendrick could remain in my will, 3 years. If they failed to meet the terms, they would be automatically removed. 1. Weekly family therapy, no exceptions. 2. Community service at a homeless shelter, so they would see the faces that looked like the person they thought I was. 3. Real apologies, not only to me but to Micah and Asha for years of contempt. 4. Real time, family dinners, meaningful conversations, not just calls when they needed money or favors. When the signing was done, Brielle walked up to Micah, her voice breaking. I'm sorry, she said. For all the years I made you feel like a failure, and I'm sorry for how I treated Asha. Micah stared at her for a long time, then replied calmly, If you truly want to change, you'll have to prove it with actions. I'll be here, but this is your last chance. Kendrick stepped forward too, his voice lower now. I'm sorry too, he said, to both of you. I let my career make me forget what family is. Asha looked at them, still cautious, but her eyes softened a fraction. An apology is a beginning, she said, but action is what matters. Time will answer. A week later, I stood in front of Micah and Asha's new home in South Shore, a 2-story house, newly painted, large windows pulling in the light. The yard was wide and empty in the way that made you see the future the moment you looked. Flower beds, a white fence, summer dinners on the porch. Micah and Asha stood on the front steps, staring at the house like they still couldn't believe it. "Is it really ours?" Asha asked again, for what must have been the 10th time. "Yours," I nodded. "No mortgage. No strings, just a roof for a family that deserves it." Micah hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, "not just for the house, but for giving us the chance to be ourselves." I hugged my youngest son back, the only child who opened the door with his heart, not with conditions. "No, my son," I said. "I'm the one who has to thank you. You saved me from becoming a woman so bitter she can't believe in anyone anymore." The next 6 months were not easy. Family therapy had sessions so heavy that everyone wanted to stand up and walk out. There were conversations that made old wounds bleed again. But Brielle and Kendrick, they kept coming. Not perfectly, not quickly, but they showed up. I saw Brielle serving soup at the shelter, eyes red when she realized that one wrong step, just one, could have put her mother in that line for real. I saw Kendrick providing free checkups to people who couldn't pay, his voice gentler when he faced an elderly man without insurance. And then there were small moments that stayed with me more than the big ones. One dinner at Micah's, Brielle laughed for real. Not the polite social smile, but a laugh that burst out naturally at Micah's story about a student. On another afternoon, Kendrick helped Asha plant flowers in the yard, a surgeon's hands lifting fragile seedlings as carefully as if he were holding a heart. Had they completely changed? I still didn't dare to claim that. 3 years is a long road. But at least they were walking, and for me, that alone was a beginning. 1 year after the day I knocked on 3 doors in Chicago, I sat in Micah and Asha's garden in South Shore. Flowers bloomed bright, red, white, yellow, like punctuation marks on a new chapter of life. Micah played with their little son on the grass. Brielle and Kendrick were there too, awkward but present. When the sun set, painting the Chicago sky pink, I finally understood what I should have understood long ago. Money can buy a house, a car, an opportunity, but it cannot buy a door that opens when you are at your most desperate. It cannot buy hands that reach for you when you collapse. It cannot buy love, the kind of love that doesn't need a reason to stay. Real family is whoever opens the door when every other door has closed, and I was lucky, in a way I never dared believe my whole life, that the last door opened.